Welcome to the Silent Podcast. Today I'm honored to be joined by Kiran Nazish, an award winning journalist and the founding director of the Coalition for Women in Journalism. For more than 2 decades, she reported from the front lines of conflicts in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Mexico, and beyond, writing for major outlets like New York Times, LA Times, and USA Today, and many more. Witnessing the discrimination and dangers women face, Kiran has also brought international attention to how repressive regimes target journalists, particularly women, for their work. Kiran, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to talk to you, and I must also mention that I remember your work, and I remember that we did once a panel in very early days of our inception. I think was it 2016 or 2017? You were on one of our first
Yes, it
global
was
panels.
yes, it was a couple of years ago, and you've really been a huge supporter also in my case. It started 2016, and for years now going on. One of the controversial imams that sued me about my articles, and you've been a great support. So thank you so much. And it really means a lot for me as a journalist and for hundreds and thousands of other journalists that you are supporting them globally.
Thank you.
I would
Thank you.
like to start with your personal experience. So, spending more than 2 decades reporting from some of the world's toughest conflict zones, what first drew you to journalism and what kept you for that long?
Hmm. Well, thank you. I mean it's kind of like I am I'm from a long time ago. I started journalism really I think maybe in the 2000s, but I started an internship at one of the local news, like the top English newspapers in my country, Pakistan, in 1999. And that kind of like really got me in. But when I was a kid, I used to write for the children's paper. So it was something just like a natural evolution in my life, even though I studied economics and maths and statistics and all that. So journalism for me was just something that was natural, that came, something that I kind of picked up when I was very, very young. And then that kind of evolved into I couldn't like leave when so it was like one of the things that I did on the side while I was in college, et cetera, et cetera. So like my career started really early, but I will say that for most of those early years, the first decade, and the 9/11 happened. So I started journalism when we were talking, the millennium was just about to happen, and we were talking about the future of the planet and the future of humanity and technology. And we were talking about robots. I remember I was writing about robots, coming, as a next thing, in terms of human progress and those kind of things. And then suddenly 9/11 happened and the world changed. And then my country, Pakistan, where I was from and I was working, it joined the US war against terror as an ally, as one of the foremost allies, which meant that a lot was going on here where I was. And very early in my career, terrorism and, a war scenario was very much present in the ecosystem. So even though it was in Afghanistan, but our government was supporting the United States, and, our journalism really got affected by it way before
Yeah.
I think that journalism in many different parts of the world did. But anyways, I do want to mention that for the first decade or so, I was, like I was a researcher, writer, editor. I did production and direction. I eventually worked for TV, and I was a producer and director for infotainment programs. But I became a conflict reporter because an old friend was killed by the intelligence agencies in Pakistan, and I sort of wanted to investigate what happened to him because it was really shocking for us. And a lot was going on. There were bomb attacks happening all the time, in our cities, and we were seeing our colleagues blown up. And, and this is the, 2000s, right? We were
Yeah.
talking about early 2000s. So there was a lot, and I think it was shaping the world. It was shaping our world, and I think and I kind of sort of left my very high-paying, very cool job as a producer director and started reporting from conflicts.
We both basically, I started at 2001, 2002, approximately
You
the
did.
same, yeah, time. So, but even though times has changed, you were talking, you've been writing about robots, we have these days AI, technology changed, but the mindset, the way women are being seen, especially in these parts of the world, working as a journalist, woman in this field, can you share a little bit of what were your main challenges? Because in the beginning, now when I go back and think about why I was not treated equally like my coworker who was a male. So have you experienced this in the beginning of your career?
Hmm. So I will say, so my experience was very different, and as was, I always like, I feel like it's some sort of a past timeline almost when I think about, when I started doing journalism, especially the early 2000s, even until 2010 or 2015. Oh, 2010 would be better. Yeah, so the first decade. And that was really an important part of my career, like shaping me in the industry. 10 years is a very long time, even though now I look back, it's like a long time ago. But it was a very, very important time, which was shaping me as a journalist. But at that time, I had it quite, from my perspective, I was in an industry which was male dominated. Women were not looked upon really nicely. I used to have quite a bit of argument with my family about it because, it was not decent to work in the media as a journalist at the time. So I come from a conservative country and there are certain challenges. So, but and I think only like sometimes very elite people from very elite backgrounds ended up working in the media because they were educated and they had a very different. So there's a hierarchy, like there's a social dynamic there, like who ended up working in journalism in that country. So because we're talking about being a woman, it's important to like look at it like when we look at global journalism, we think there's a part of the world like Pakistan or Afghanistan or like India or like, I think Mexico, Latin America, where like women are not, there's machismo culture in Latin America, right? So the women have been in different dynamics, but as far as my concern experience is concerned, I had it easy in the sense that I knew that it was a male-dominated world. So the way I navigated it was I was often the only woman. I never even thought about this. Is like now I've learned like very recently, like people pointing me out, you were the only one. I was like, yeah, I was.
But you
And
have to,
it never really was the thing for me being the only woman because it was just a natural way of navigating the environment. But the one, and I will say that, my career, like I was able to access places like where Taliban were training or going to a school where Taliban were getting trained by, hidden schools and that kind of stuff. Or like there were people, very cooperative people in villages or like local leaders in different parts of like Fatah, for example, where,
Mhm.
bordering Afghanistan, where I was able to access those places because I was a woman. Because not only, yes, there's this other culture where women were not there, but because I was a woman, I got access because people trusted women more.
Mhm.
So there is that dynamic where the trust, if you are somebody that people know and you've been able to build a repertoire in communities and that people know you, then you can really build trust. Journalism is all about trust. And I think in my career and women in general have been able to build that trust where they can. I'm not saying that applies everywhere. And I'm definitely not saying that applies anymore at all. What I see today, like every single day as we do advocacy, I don't think women have that anymore.
No.
And it just like breaks my heart that women don't have that anymore, that trust that we used to have with communities.
Yeah, that's why I asked you because in my case, I've experienced like threats and harassment, and that when they were sending me threats, they were not just as a journalist, but also as a woman, as a mother, and mentioning my kids. So, have you experienced censorship, or during your career, do you have a time when you thought, this is happening to me because I am woman?
So the early, I did, of course, I've experienced censorship. I've experienced smear attacks before they were fashionable, et cetera, et cetera. Um, in the early times, I think like when I was going to like the border of Afghanistan and all that stuff, I know that I was, going with the help of local leaders and really like vetted people. Everyone, like I was also vetting people because I wanted to be safe and all that. So everything was vetted. But I was able to wear a burqa and able to access certain places easily. Because I was a local, I did not need, ID cards
Yeah.
in the sense that foreign journalists need. So I was able to access those places. But I will say that, so what I'm trying to say is like I was not getting on the radar. And sometimes I would publish when I started publishing things, there were certain people who knew like so our the threats that we faced were mostly from the intelligence agencies who did not want journalists to access places to say like where, if you remember that the war on terror and the whole controversy of Pakistan being involved in creating terrorists or creating giving safe haven. So that was a story that I was
What can you
covering.
share? Can you share if you can, like just a case when what which were the way? Were they calling you, emailing you? What were the
So
ways
I
they
was
were
un
trying to silence you, basically?
so I was trying to say that I was always under the radar, usually because I'm going in a burqa, so I'm hidden. So when I used to move around, I don't think that I they were aware that I was moving around. And B, because I was a woman, I was not important enough at the time to be a threat. So it's not like agencies target every journalist. They target very particular. This has always been an age-old strategy. It happens in Western countries too. They
But what?
target very few
Yeah.
journalists so that they make a story out of it, so that
But
then everyone else. So I was like one of the invisible journalists, and that was because I was a woman. Until I, traveled, I went to the New York Times and I became like really popular. Like some people really got concerned about me in the agencies. And then I was covering Iraq. And then there was a story that I came back to Pakistan for, just one particular story. It was about abductions that was happening of certain people who were kind of exposing Pakistani's military's activities, and those people were getting abducted. So like I came back to do that story, and then I got targeted. And the what I'm trying to say is like I was under the radar, and even if they knew that I was there, they were not like bothering me. I knew a lot of people in the government, but no one ever like threatened me because I wasn't important enough.
but the moment you
And
became
that's the woman
important, then
dynamic there.
yeah.
What's
And
that?
the moment you became known, like you were not under their radar, what happened then? How did you start becoming a target? And what were the forms that they were targeting you?
Okay. So this is kind of long time ago. I don't talk about it anymore. I was
Or just
it's
share the
in the
methods.
past, but I can say that like when I was targeted eventually, it was as bad as it gets. And I mean, I don't think I would have been alive if I was still in Pakistan at the time. And they were like when Pakistani agencies target, they really do want to kill you, and they mean it. And they have killed a lot of my friends. A lot of my friends have been killed. And I was told that at one point, I was told that if I ever come back, I will be, at the airport, I would be killed right away. Um, what would happen after I come out of the airport? Like there was I forgot what it was. But anyways, so it was, I can't go into the details of that. And it is a long time ago, and I have done a lot of work to recover from that. From the safety point of view for myself, for my sources, like I was not the only one who was targeted. My sources were targeted. My A translator was targeted, and it was serious, and it's a long time ago.
You experience yourself, I experienced myself, and we both know what it means to be under death threat. So, what made you decide to form Coalition for Women in Journalism and support women across over 140 countries?
Hmm. So I will say that I don't think, from my point of view, I don't think that women or journalists generally, when we get targeted, that we feel like, oh, like, now this is the end of our lives. Never. It never happens.
We
We
continue.
find we find a way to continue doing our work. And I think that that's what always, journalists are, especially after a certain time of your in your career, you don't just like fizzle out. So I think that it's not that that really had an impact on me. What had an impact on me that made me build this organization was how women were treated in the industry and how the ecosystem of safety and acknowledging the integrity of journalists, the acknowledging the need for safety for women working in conflict zones, acknowledging that women need support when they're targeted by oligarchs or they're targeted by police, how that sort of treatment of women and the importance of women being targeted really was not there, and that is what impacted me. So in 16, was it 2015, I was when I was covering ISIS in Iraq, and we were covering ISIS growing. ISIS was now like booming, but there was a quiet time, and during that quiet time, I think it's like when you're a journalist, you're go go go. You
Yeah.
don't have time to think, you don't have time to process. Whatever is happening in your body, but you're processing and you're going really fast. And during that quiet time, nothing was happening. The US and Turkey were not like really going after ISIS. There was a quiet period of a couple of weeks when I think I started processing my shit.
Yeah.
And this is 2015. So this is like, about 15 years of my career. And and then I went to New York for like a HEFAT training. And after the HEFAT training, I broke down. And that was like just, I had panic attacks and all that, but also I was hospitalized. My body shut down. Like I had my digestive system wasn't working. Like a lot of my body systems were shutting down. And I thought I was going to, it was very bad. I thought I was going to die. And I think there were these times when I would just wake up, in the hospital, and I'd be like, what just happened? Because I had a great career, like I had a privileged career. I was a journalist from Pakistan. I was able to go work for foreign media, which is very, very rare.
Yeah.
And I was able to go around the world and cover whatever stories I wanted to cover, right? So in a way, if Pakistan was a difficult terrain for me, which it was, I was able to go to Iraq and cover that, or Turkey or cover that, and or Mexico, and so on and so forth. So it was a privilege. And I had been a professor. I started journalism schools at two universities by that time. So I was really shocked at what was going on. And so before that, I had like years before, I'd worked at the New York Times, and I had some of my friends and mentors who were like really ahead of me, women who had been there for 20 years ahead of me, women who had Pulitzer Prizes. I spoke to them, and they would always say that we were on our own. Like women in the top news organizations in the world never really felt that they had support systems
Yeah.
and mentorships, even when newsrooms did have mentorship
Yeah.
programs. Women were had to do it. All the legacy women's, like that you see, Christiana Manpour, like all the women you see in the industry, they've been doing this on their own.
That's
And
true.
so, in a way, I think my and your generation, we were the ones kind of like, were like, what is going on?
When you mentioned 2015, that's when 2012, I started writing about the increase of extremist religious group, and ISIS was really not known at the time. In 2014, it started coming up, and no one
Yes.
was really much reporting on that. And in 2015, 2016, there was this journalist from New York Times, Carlota Gal. Yes, she came
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Kosovo. And we, of course, we had information because we were writing, and we went with her in the field. And we were attacked then as a, oh, you are helping this other journalist. So there are
Mm,
different forms that they try. You were mentioning that you feel also like privileged because you got to have report from all this conflict zone. It is interesting, despite the danger that we go, it driven us to go more further. We know that
mhm.
we might be killed. We receive all the threats. It's in front of our eyes, and we still don't stop. We continue.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned in the beginning when we both started journalism, there were not many women in journalism. But these days, we see more and more young women that want to become a journalist.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's because like I mean, it's all like, I'm going to go into a little bit of philosophies. Like every generation of our species is always evolving into, whether we see the world falling apart or not, we are, as human beings, we are evolving constantly. And what evolution essentially really means is that new generations are always letting go of the things that have kept us from being, a more conscious
Yeah.
species. And so that means that more women are there. Like, it's a very natural thing. Like, as generations go, there will be, whether you like it or not, there will be women doing the things, because we are, as a species, evolving into understanding that actually male and female are equal. So we will see more women in every career and everything, in every industry, including journalism.
But which we see reports also your organization is reporting every day, and looking at the most recent reports 2024 and 2025, numbers are alarming of the women in journalism being targeted, threatened, and killed.
Yes. So I'll explain that to you in a little bit, but I do want to mention about Carlotta Gall. She also
Yeah.
worked in Pakistan. She's part of our peer support group. Are you in that group?
No.
Okay. Well, we'll get you. We'll talk about
Okay.
that. But she was in Pakistan, like, was targeted by the agencies because foreign journalists were not allowed in some of those
Hmm.
areas where I was mentioning that I was able to go because I'm a local and I can just go
Yeah.
with local people wearing that. And the tradition is that agencies can't ask you who's that woman with you.
Hmm.
That was a culture. So I was able to cash on that when I was going
Yeah.
to those places. And Carlotta was a foreign journalist. So when she went to Balochistan, she was really threatened. I think she was harmed. There was like really, it was really bad. And that became a huge controversy. That like just it was really and Pakistani agencies have done a lot of like bad stuff. Like sometimes they would tip off if foreign journalists were going into those regions, they would tip off the Taliban and like,
Yeah.
they would abduct them and then journalists would get abducted. So that was natural. So it was very dangerous. But what I was
Okay.
explaining earlier, like I was able to go because eventually they got really mad at me too, because, and that's why they kind of, and, and Carlotta is like so amazing. Like but
Yes.
also like everyone gets triggered by her because I know there are certain countries that go like because of that story also, because it
Yeah.
became a huge story. So when she goes to certain places, it was like radar, like these countries would like be like, we don't want her here.
And she always goes to the places where it's very dangerous. Then she went to Turkey when Erdogan was throwing into the jail journalists, and she's been reporting from Turkey. I remember I reached out a couple of times to her. So yeah, I would like to know more because you have all this
So
data.
you said about, yeah, so now to answer your question. So here's the thing. So in the we started documenting the cases because women journalists were
Yeah.
getting targeted. When we were a mentorship organization, so we were not like a press freedom organization in the beginning. But like our mentees and mentors were getting targeted in different parts of the world. And one of our mentees was abducted. One of our mentees, my mentee actually in Turkey, was deported. She was a Dutch journalist on a lame, invalid terrorism case. Then she sued the Dutch government eventually. And so there were there was another journalist in our network who was taken by the police in India. And so we were just caught up in like trying to support journalists, even though we were a mentorship organization, wasn't our job to do that. But we couldn't find resources from international organizations to support women journalists. And it's an important point to make at this particular time in at the end of 2025 is women journalists have not been taken seriously. And while in the last few years, I'm sure you've experienced this as well, is that we have seen this rise of like global chorus on supporting women journalists and online trolling is bad for women and da, da. And now a lot of organizations, including UNESCO and a lot of international groups are interested in how women journalists get targeted, but it doesn't, no one gets to the bottom of it.
No.
The issue is that women journalists get targeted because they don't get the kind of support system. Like everyone who targets female journalists knows, especially if it's a government or an oil company or an institution or even trolls, anonymous trolls online, they are aware that when they would target women, it would just be easy. It will be quick because everyone joins the chorus because we
Yes.
live in a society where women are not respected. So the only way for us to have women not be targeted is for institutions to have proper laws, right? So we need infrastructures that say women cannot just be targeted, but women are targeted because they are not only vulnerable. In fact, women are not vulnerable, but they're seen as vulnerable, and they're seen as vulnerable because they don't have institutional support. When, in the last year, this is very different from threats and violence. Look at one way of looking at this is like in the last 2 years, 2021 to 2024, there have been a lot of layoffs globally. So around 30,000 journalists have been laid off globally, only in Western countries. Majority of these journalists are women. And then the other majority of these journalists are younger women.
Yeah.
So we are institutionally in a state where we're saying women are not important enough to be in the newsroom. They're still not important enough to be in managerial positions, and but if there will be, then then it will be token, like we have to fix these institutions in a way.
But even to some, because you cover also other countries, basically, those that in the document they might have laws. Let me just go back to my story and I want to explain the importance of having
Yes.
the support. 2013, I was writing about this huge business company that supported political parties during the pre-election campaign. Then, when that political party came to power, they paid back this business with a tender $60 million. And I had all the facts. I was writing about how they pay. And I was sent to court in 5 days. Usually, when you sue somebody, you have to wait probably months and years. In my case, I was invited by the judge in 5 days. What happened? Reporters Without Borders, international organization, sent a letter to Kosovo and said, listen, keep an eye to this case because this is not a journalist business. It is political. It helped a lot. It raised awareness among people, among judge, among everybody. That's what I'm trying to say. We might have laws in our country, but we need international pressure to for the women to have and feel this support. As you said, when we are targeted, everybody joins that
Of
way
course.
of yeah, that course of putting you or threatening you and trying to silence you.
Yes. I will say so, yes. And like you mentioned, so what you're talking about, like, so this is very, very important. This is why we do what we do. Like when international organizations back in, 2018, when other organizations were not supporting these women that we knew who were journalists, like we even, and this is not to name or shame or blame anyone, it's an institutional problem. But at that time, no one was paying attention to women journalists. And so if a journalist gets taken by police and she's in prison, we need to bail her out, right?
Yeah.
No one wanted to bail her out. Okay. When the journalist got abducted, no one wanted to write an advocacy letter because she was working for local media and she was not very well known. So they couldn't vet her. And we got emails even saying she's not a journalist, even though she was a journalist. And these are international press freedom advocacy organizations. So it's very hard. It doesn't have to be hard to talk about it. This
Yeah.
is what it is. It's just to identify where we are at and try to work around. And this is not criticism against any organization, right? So the important, which is why we started doing press freedom work, is that the importance of saying that this person that has been arrested is a journalist And women don't get that. And that if that person, that individual needs something more than saying that she's a journalist, then there's an advocacy letter to support from an international organization that can help her and not expedite other kinds of, there's all kinds of misinformation. What is the first thing that happens? Is when a journalist is sued or there's a court case, always there's a misinformation campaign that's accompanied by that. There's
Yeah.
some sort of smear that you're not a journalist. So there's an effort
They
to
try to lose credibility to that person in
exactly.
order not to have support.
Which is why you need international organizations to jump in. And so that's the most important. So in the 145 countries that we have monitored and the reports that we've published, like our statements, or we write letters regularly to governments when that is needed. Sometimes we write collective letters and we get other organizations to sign those letters. There's a lot of that work that has happened. I will say that things are very different right now in 2025. So those kind of things are happening, and the world is really, really, we are in an uncertain territory. And I think those letters that used to work at one point, that used to pressure governments, and you're absolutely right that judges and lawyers oftentimes don't know, right? So it helps. It depends on the country you're in. So sometimes when we would write those letters to journalists in Turkey, it would not make any
That's, I
difference.
wanted to
Why?
mention Turkey first of all. How do you manage with these countries when you have authoritarian regime and they are basically, the Turkey is the largest prison right now for journalists and human rights activists.
Iran and Turkey.
Yes, Iran and Turkey. How do you manage to go through to especially these countries, and what are your challenges there?
So we don't go, we always have team that works. And I myself worked in Turkey for 5 years, was one of the most important countries for me as well. And I think this is before I started the coalition. So we have around 300 members in Turkey who are journalists. And then we have journalists who are exile journalists who live in Turkey is a really important country because this is a country where you have exiles coming from all over the world. So
Yes.
you've got Eastern Europe, you've got a lot of Polish, Ukrainian journalists, you've got Iranian, Saudi journalists, you've got Afghan, Pakistani journalists, Indian journalists. Like this is a hub of exile journalists in many ways. Egyptian journalists, journalists who actually have started news organizations from Turkey while they were targeted in their own country. So it's an interesting dynamic. And in Turkey, Turkey is one of the countries where we work a little differently, where on the one hand, we are defending journalists who are in Turkey and have to be kind of in a conflict situation. I mean, we faced a lot of challenges in Turkey. Our team has gotten targeted in Turkey. Like we've had our team's house raided in Turkey. Like so there have been many difficulties in working because on the one hand we are defending Turkish journalists and Kurdish journalists who are targeted by Turkey and arrested regularly. And on the other hand, we have a better dynamic in Turkey where we are able to protect, or sometimes when we are relocating journalists, we can bring them to Turkey if they're from Iran or
But
Afghanistan.
those who don't really report on Turkey regime,
Exactly.
that's,
They
yeah,
don't
that's the
exactly.
difference.
Exactly. So that's the dynamic I was trying to explain. Like on the one hand, Turkey is very aggressive to journalists. But when the journalists are exiled from another country because of its own foreign policy and the way the country works, it's in a transition of a foreign policy constantly, I think, for the last decade. So that has also allowed this cocoon. It has made Turkey a country where you could have foreign journalists
Can
live safely, and that there are things that we can do there. But I do one thing that I want to mention, that Turkey is one of the most aggressive since 2015, which is like really like beginning of what we were doing. Like Turkey has always been one of the top jailers of women journalists. How we have in the early years, we used to do advocacy. So we used to work with lawyers a lot, which we cannot do in the last 2.5 years. or maybe almost 3 years that we haven't been able to do is to work with lawyers, because now our lawyers get arrested, and things have been less effective in terms of advocacy. But in Turkey, we have been able to get journalists released from prison very regularly when they are targeted, because we were able to work at one point with really good lawyers. But I think that what that country tells us is stories like when you have censorship and there is an aggressive targeting of the press, of the values of democracy, it does increase when that continues. And after a while, you could do some advocacy work and have some success, but it is going to fizzle out eventually. Because, advocacy, in a country where you don't have democracy cannot be done in that country alone. You do need international pressure. You do need a collaboration between local and international organizations to be doing the advocacy for journalists to be able to have any semblance in that ecosystem.
And you've mentioned Turkey and Iran. What other regions do you see most dangerous for women in journalism?
I think right now everywhere is, I mean, there is no country in the world that is not. I mean, I would say, yeah, maybe Western Europe is slightly better, but it's not really. Like we are getting reports from France and Germany and the Netherlands, which, I mean, Netherlands is one of the leading countries of the Media Freedom Coalition, the Global Media Freedom Coalition that, that kind of has signatories. So, there are issues with every country, but yes, there are obviously certain places where they're absolutely more dangerous. Latin America, Guatemala, Brazil has its own kind of cases. There are certain countries in Latin America that have a very different dynamic of how journalists are targeted. We have journalists who would have people break into their homes and assault them or abduct them. There are journalists who have been killed by unknown personnel, and that the investigations have not gone anywhere. Like we've tried working with police, we've tried working with local government, and there is no way that we can get them to investigate.
Yeah.
Even investigate. Investigation is the beginning of a step. It's not the ultimate step of keeping journalists safe. So Latin America is very difficult and dangerous because of the way local authorities and cartels and all these,
Yeah.
threats to journalists work. Then you have Middle East, and there you've got some parts of the world where you have conflict and you have wars. Obviously, the genocide in Gaza makes it has been the deadliest place in the history that we've ever recorded for women journalists and journalists in general. And then you also have other places like Yemen that are completely ignored, Sudan, where it's completely ignored. Like helping journalists in certain parts of the world right now, parts of Africa, the Congo, it's really hard to get help on the ground. And sometimes how we usually work is like we always have people on the ground who can we work with,
Yeah.
um, either part of our network or part of another network but there are parts of the world right now in the Middle East and Africa where we cannot do that anymore because all local people are at threat. There is no one that is safe to be able to work and execute any kind of, safety mechanism. So there are parts of the world that are more dangerous than others. Africa and Middle East are some of
Yeah.
them.
And as you've mentioned, in most of the part of the world, as what women face in the beginning, the locals, they say that they start the campaign against them. So social media has become both a tool and a weapon. And right now with AI, I just attended the UN meeting. They asked me, "What is your concern?" And I said, "My concern is huge because they can take my photo, my voice, and do the whole story against me, and people will believe." And this way, these are all the campaign build up to threaten, because this is how it starts. So, what is your opinion on this regard? Because it's moving so fast. And what do you think about this?
So yes, AI is extremely dangerous. It has already been used in creating misinformation campaigns about journalists. Just like I think 2 weeks ago, we were doing like looking at our data on AI, and I mean, there's all kinds of problems with AI. Like the examples of what AI has been used includes not only like journalists whose profiles are used fake videos are made about them by in terms of sharing misinformation. It is also happening in the US, like one of our members, Amna Nawaz, who was at PBS when Trump got elected, there was fake AI about her sharing fake news. So it's happening in countries with more integrity and democracy as well, but especially in countries where you have less integrity and less democracies, AI is used as, it's used 10x more, and in worse scenarios. Our greater concern is that it's being used for pornographic, sharing pornographic images of women journalists and videos. That is something that's really extreme. In the past, we had been able to work with, companies like Twitter, when it used to be Twitter and Facebook, to take down content like this, right? Which in the last few years we have not been able to do. Facebook has not, Meta has not really, been as vigilant anymore. In fact, I think these companies are deliberately going into a direction where it's not that they don't care. They're very aware. It's that they deliberately want to cycle these kind of things, because it kind of makes, they just grow faster. It's for their growth, and it grows faster. So their priorities are not civil society and protection of the media or protection of democracy. Their priorities are different, and now that's becoming clear. So, of course, there's a lot of work going on in terms of regulating. I mean, we really think that AI should be regulated. But I don't think that work is going, from my point of view, it's just a lot of people trying to talk about let's regulate, and then there's a lot of pushback coming. What we need to actually regulate is to directly work with Meta. We directly need to work with Google. We directly need to work with Chat GPT, to like all the AI big companies, to bring them on the table and say, like, these are the values that we need to have with AI, that AI cannot be used for so and so.
So knowing that all this are struggle for women in journalism, if a woman in journalism and young journalist somewhere in Middle East, in Africa, in Europe, in Balkans is watching this interview and she needs your help, what is the way to reach out to you?
It's very easy. It's on our website, and we have a form where you can report a case if something has happened to you or a colleague. There is a way to report the case on womeninjournalism.org, or reach out to us through our website. Our email is press@womeninjournalism.org. We also have peer support networks in different parts of the world. So if anyone would like to join that network, they can reach out to us and we can make that happen as well.
Kiran, thank you so much for being my guest today and for the amazing job that you are doing.
Thank you.